All right. Hey, you guys. Hello, friends. I'd love to talk about doing the elimination diet today. I think this is one way of really getting your inflammation under control pretty quickly, address a lot of different symptoms, and actually free yourself of a lot of symptoms you might have been experiencing for a very long time without realizing that this is what's causing them. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing what is an elimination diet, how do you know if you need to do an elimination diet, what are the foods that you're going to be cutting out and why, how long for, and then how do you reintroduce these foods, and then where do you go for recipes, okay? So this is going to be the gist of it. And I'm wondering who here has already done an elimination diet and what has worked for you, like what has changed for you in your own journey. And so I've just realized that, okay, never mind. So let's dive in. So the elimination diet, the whole objective around it is to eliminate foods that we know are highly inflammatory and giving your body like a really good break in terms of lowering the inflammation, giving your liver a really good rest. We're talking about the liver this month, right? So the whole of January is like detoxing and liver. And if you caught my live on Tuesday that I did just a couple of days ago, I talked about that you don't have to, go into really deep detoxes and stuff like that. Is you can just basically, just even doing the elimination diet will your body will perceive it as a form of detoxification and is going to get a break from a lot of inflammatory foods. And so Susan is saying that she's already doing it for 3 weeks. She's been doing AIP, so this paleo for autoimmune protocol. And so I'm wondering, Susan, what experience have you had so far? So AIP is a pretty restricted elimination diet because it's specifically for autoimmune diseases. And so my recommendation is to start off with something gentler and more gentle elimination diet that removes less foods. And if this still not helping you, then you can go deeper. And I will explain that how that works. So Flo is asking, which are the high inflammatory foods? Yeah, so this is where, so let's talk about those. So first of all, everyone's foods could potentially be different, but we know that there is a whole bunch of foods that a lot of people are having problem with. And so those would be things like gluten, dairy, soy, corn, eggs, unfortunately, right? And for some people, you may say, you know what, I feel really terrible every time I eat sugar. And that could be, your problem too, right? But generally, when we talk about the elimination diet, those are the 5 foods that we eliminate. And then you also eliminate foods that you're suspecting you're having a problem with. So for example, I remember once working with a woman who said, every time I have strawberries, I get like a real big rash around my mouth. So we said, okay, we're going to eliminate that too, because even having an allergy to a food makes a difference. And by the way, do you guys know what is the difference between an allergy and a food intolerance? Or if you know, then great. And if you don't, then just maybe mention in the comments, please explain. And then I can dive into that, because there is a difference actually between those two. So those are the 5 foods you're going to be eliminating. And, and for some of you, it might be kind of scary because you'll be like, oh my God, I can't live without my pasta. I can't live without my cheese, right? And whatever. And the issue is that, I want to offer you a reframe that you can, when you close one door, call these 5 foods that I talked about, and you walk into a supermarket, you can actually still eat a lot of the food out there, right? So like most of the vegetables are going to be available to you. All the animal proteins are available. You can do whatever, fish and seafood you want to do, right? So focus on the things you can have rather than the things you can't have. That's a really important reframe. So let me explain the difference. Yeah. So the difference between a food allergy and a food intolerance is that food allergy is very instant. So for example, like my former client would have a strawberry and she will have immediately start getting red rings around her mouth, right? Food intolerance so it's instant. You can feel it pretty quickly. And it's typically, most of the time revolves around skin issues, breathing issues, right? And so food sensitivity, so food intolerance is something that a different part of the immune system plays a role here. If you're doing testing, and we can talk about testing too, is the IgG testing, where for food allergies is the IgA testing. So allergies is IgA testing. It's a different part of the immune system, instant reaction. In intolerance is a delayed reaction. Delayed because it could happen 30 minutes later to even 2 to 3 days later. So for example, you might be having, let's just say a piece of toast, right? That is gluten, it's got gluten in it. And you might only feel the aches of it the next day. You might be having dairy today and be constipated tomorrow and not making the connection that is that food that has actually caused it. And so the only way to really know for sure what food problem you have is to cut them out for a period of time. We're talking here about 8 weeks, and then reintroduce them slowly. So you may ask, why don't I just do a food sensitivity panel, right? Couple of reasons. The singular reason is that they're highly inaccurate. No matter what the practitioners or the labs are telling you, I've done them over and over again, and they are highly inaccurate, meaning you get a lot of positive negatives, which means that, false negatives, which basically means that false because it shows you it's a negative, but you actually do have a problem with that food. One of the reasons why a false negative can come up is because you've been avoiding dairy, for example, already for a period of time. So when you go to do food sensitivity testing, it just shows like you don't have a problem with dairy. Yeah, because you don't have the antibodies for dairy, and so that's why it's not showing up. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a problem with dairy. With the elimination diet, when you eliminate the food, you give your body a break, right? Then you reintroduce the food. Then your body will tell you, and the body doesn't lie, whether that food is your friend or your foe. So I'm gonna read you a few examples of like what food intolerances can be causing, because the list is actually quite long. If you guys got my book, Cooking for Hormone Balance, it's on page 20, starts on 45. So everything from weight gain and weight loss, right? So food sensitivities to certain foods, and that includes eggs, because I always get called out on by people saying, hold on a second, but eggs are a superfood. How can you be asking me to take out eggs? And the issue is that, yes, they are a superfood. A lot of different foods can be superfoods, but the question is whether your body constitution is breaking them down and accepting the food or rejecting it. And unfortunately, when it comes to eggs, it is a very common problem that a lot of people are actually rejecting it. And we can talk about different kind of eggs in just a second. So one of the big things when it comes to weight gain, food sensitivities is weight gain. Stubborn weight that starts, that just wouldn't go away. You're having a lot of yo-yoing of your weight. And one of the things when you reintroduce foods, when I talk about that, you will learn that when you introduce the food, you can also step on the scale, and your inflammation alone can be causing weight gain. So for example, when you reintroduce gluten, you might notice that morning you step on the scale and you suddenly gain like 4 pounds for no good reason, right? And so that's just like really literally how crazy inflammatory it can be. Puffy hands and legs from water retention, very common, as well as belly fat. That can all be due to food sensitivities. Because remember, belly fat, a lot of it is blood sugar imbalance and inflammation. So these foods are highly inflammatory. A lot of gut issues. So things like bloating, constipation, acid reflux, gas, loose stool, tummy pains, and cramping are not normal. If you guys are having a lot of bloating, like if you like to wear pants with a rubber band instead of a belt because you bloat so much when you eat, I mean, that's a real problem, and that's not okay. Sometimes we get so used to something being so common, we assume that it's normal. It is not. So IBS, autoimmune diseases, any protocol, if you see any protocol that is about autoimmune diseases would always encompass elimination diet to different degrees. Some of them are stricter than what I'm presenting here. And then pain is a huge one. So arthritic pain, unexplained muscle and joint pain, back pain, carpal tunnel pain, especially due to oxalates, headaches and migraines, that's a huge one. So I used to have a lot of headaches and migraines, actually, not just headaches, both, but migraines too. When I had a problem with my issue was eggs, dairy, and gluten, right? So, and I'm not sure which one was. I think it was the gluten that was bringing it on. Mental functions, things like brain fog, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, depression, and anxiety can be due to food intolerances. Lacking of energy, that's a huge one. It's really difficult to get up in the morning. You're sleeping a lot more than you should, right? And you nap in the afternoons, and you depend on coffee a lot and stimulants in order to get you going. For some people, it could be even breathing, or everything to do with your breath, respiratory system. So asthma, sinus infections, and stuffy nose, very common ones. Allergies, things like seasonal allergies and chronic allergies, like to cats and dogs, can actually improve when you do the elimination diet. Part of it is because allergy response is due to the immune system responding, and that's hugely connected to your liver and your digestion. And so your immune system is not so overreactive. Sleep, so problems falling asleep, not having enough deep sleep, waking, feeling really tired, right? And depending a lot on sleeping pills and supplements to knock you out or to sleep. Skin, so the skin is a huge one. And, I will say, as much as we sell skincare, and it's probably bad for my business to say that, the product that you put on your skin is only partly responsible for the quality of your skin. Is going to be far more important than what you're eating and how it's going to impact you than what you're putting on your skin. So internal, and your skin speaks when it's not happy. So part of the reason why I actually started off on this journey was because this was like 20 years ago, was because even though I wasn't a practitioner back then, but it kind of created an awareness for me, like what was going on, was that because I had cystic acne. I was covered in acne on my face. I had them on my chest. I had them on my back. I had them on my butt, and sometimes even on my thighs, believe it or not. And cystic acne is not like that little zit you can pop. It's like a little volcano on your face. It was horrible. And this is when I started investigating, why am I 20 whatever years old and I still got zits? So your skin speaks. And in my case, it was dairy and eggs that were causing so much of skin inflammation. So acne is definitely one of the symptoms of food sensitivities or intolerances, but so is eczema, psoriasis, unexplained rash that just happens, and hives. And then hormonal imbalances. So, we see a lot of women reporting how their hormones improve when they do the elimination diet. So PMS, hot flashes, irregular periods, no periods, adrenal fatigue, all of that can be connected to the sensitivities to food. So you can see there is such a broad range. And if you ask your allergists, they will tell you there's no such thing because they only test the IgA part of the immune system, not the IgG, which is what we were talking here about. So let's talk about how do you do the elimination diet. You can do it in two ways. You can do it in a way that removes one food at a time. And that's a very slow, gentle way of doing things. The problem with this approach is that, for example, if you have a problem with eggs and dairy and you're removing one at a time, your symptoms will only subside to a certain degree and not fully. And so you don't really know what is, is it really helping or is it not helping? So, but it is a possibility. If this is completely freaking you out, this is a really great way of doing that. Now, why am I talking about the elimination diet in the context of hormones? It's a big deal because your whole endocrine system needs a body that is not inflamed, that is in a place of rest, in a place of where your liver is functioning well, where your digestion is functioning well, because remember, a lot of your hormones get produced and converted in your gut, and your liver is what metabolizes them and you're pooping them out. So this is not optional. I know it's kind of weird to be talking about the elimination diet when I'm the hormone person, but and I really have a challenge with practitioners who just throw supplements at people. Take this magnesium and take Vitex and take, whatever, black cohosh and red clover. And I mean, you name it, right? And just like throwing these supplements at patients while never addressing the dietary part. I can tell you right now that this, you cannot have balanced hormones when you're constantly inflamed. No amount of supplements are going to work for your hormonal balance if you don't lower the inflammation, whether it's coming from food or whether it's coming from, some toxicity, like, I don't know, horrendous stress you're experiencing, right? It's just not going to happen. Food is one thing you can control. Sometimes in life circumstances you can't control. Food you can control most of the time. So you're asking about the book. Yeah, so there's a couple of books I wrote that are completely elimination diet compliant. Cooking for Hormone Balance, that's available on Amazon. Actually, both the books are available on Amazon. And the other one is called Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. Both of them, all this, as well as our website, Hormones with an S, hormonesbalance.com, is completely compliant when it comes to the elimination diet, meaning that we do not use gluten, dairy, soy, corn, eggs at all. In fact, we have not been using any nightshade vegetables. So by the way, let me make a mention here that when you, if you have a lot of arthritic pain and muscle pains and aches around your body, we highly recommend that you also eliminate nightshade vegetables. Nightshade vegetables is the family of vegetables, plants that get their energy from the moon. So things like potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, that includes chilies, will need to be, removed for the time being. So that's a recommendation that we have, and that's part of the reason. For example, people with rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of them have a bigger reaction to nightshade vegetables than they have to, for example, gluten. Meaning the pain immediately comes back. And remember, pain is one of the symptoms of having a challenge with food sensitivities. So how do you do this? First of all, you prepare and you plan, okay? So you can get a book that complies with the elimination diet. Like I said, both of my books do, Cooking for Hormone Balance and Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. There is a ton of recipes that we have in the back here that are completely compliant with that. And then what would happen is you got to prepare a meal plan for yourself. What are you going to be eating? Especially if you're eating a lot of these inflammatory foods, then that might be quite a big transition for you. But planning is what's going to give you the confidence and I think the visibility of how you're going to get from point A to point B without, big challenges, right? Again, I want to remember the reframe, focus on the things you can have rather than the things you can't have, right? So removing these 5 foods is like, it's quite a bit, especially like if eggs, for example, are a big part of your breakfast every day. Don't worry about it, because all our recipes here are eggless and yet they're savory. You probably saw my reel the other day. I talked about savory food for breakfast, how important it is, right? And so these kind of recipes are in both the books. So how do you do that? Do you go cold turkey? That would be my suggestion. Would you have any side effects? Possibly. It depends on the body. Some people do. And so if you start having reactions in the first 4 to 7 days, meaning you suddenly get a headache. Because remember, doing the elimination diet is what we are talking about this whole month of January, which is detoxification and liver support, right? So are you going to be supporting your liver? Yes, in a huge way. So just the same way you will do a fast, and most people get side reactions to that. The same way when you do the elimination diet, it is a gentle form of a detox. And yes, you might be having some reactions. Typically, they clear out within a couple of days, and they would include things like having a headache, feeling a little bit nauseous, feeling a little bit fainting, in the head. It might include like sometimes a little bit of rashes coming out if you're very toxic. So I would say those are the major things. One of the things is part of preparation is if you're living with someone and you know yourself, either get them on board to do it with you. It's not going to kill them. It's only going to help them. I can tell you that. We have a lot of women reporting that their husbands are much more interested in the bedroom. They don't snore as much. They are a lot more patient. They don't get as angry. So men can 100% follow your elimination diet as well. If you are not doing that together with your partner, then you know yourself, like for example, if you have a whole freezer full of stuff that is going to be tempting you, my suggestion is either give it away or throw it away. um, and just get rid of these kind of foods, because initially there might be a sense of temptation. Um, and then you start and you have your meal plans and you have your recipes and log on different websites and download them, print them, buy the right books, whatever works for you, just get ready. And then you do that for a period of, the minimum really is 4 weeks. You will not feel the benefits unless you do it for 4 weeks, but you can, Nikki is saying, since I cook, he has no choice. Yay. That's the way to go. Good one. So then, when I was in private practice, I'm not anymore. I don't work with private patients anymore. But when I was, there was a lot of women who actually would email and say, I'm feeling so good. Can I go on longer? And the answer is absolutely yes. Yeah, you can go on for as long as you like. But there is a time, I would suggest, there is a time for you to start reintroducing these foods. So let's talk about that, because that can be a highly confusing time. Let me just get a little bit of water. So the introduction of food is the time when your body will speak up and decide and let you know, is this food your friend or is this your foe? Now, in terms of timing, when you're reintroducing these foods, a lot of symptoms might come back. And it's important to do that in time when it's like you don't expect your period, because then you don't know whether are you bloated because it's your period or are you bloated because you're just having a reaction to a food. Don't do that when you are like traveling or if you're not feeling well, if you're sick, right? And actually, when you're sick, being on the elimination diet is going to help you recover because your overall inflammation is significantly lower. So that's that's in terms of timing. And then in terms of the foods that you've removed, right? You want to start reintroducing them in an order where your intuition is telling you that what is the least problematic food for you, okay? So the least problematic food is, because you want to start off with that, because this is the food that's going to give you less symptoms. They won't linger on for very long. So for example, if I was to do elimination diet, I intuitively would say, I think corn is probably my least of a problem. Soy maybe is also one of my less of a problems, right? Okay, so let's just say you're reintroducing soy on a Monday, okay? And the way you do this is that you take, something that contains soy. It can be soy sauce, it can be edamame, it could be, I don't recommend soy milk ever, but it can be, maybe tofu, right? That you want to, put it into your soup or something like that, right? And then observe your reactions for the rest of the day. So if you did it on Monday, start observing right away until the following day on Tuesday. It's about 24 hours. And notice all the things that I talked about. Did you get a headache? Is there something funky going on with your skin? How was your sleep? Is there any pains in it coming back in? Is your digestion okay? Is your brain working okay? Or are you beginning to get like, a foggy brain? Like some people say that, soy makes them have foggy brain. They just can't do it, right? So then if on Tuesday you feel like you have no reactions whatsoever, everything is still dandy, then on Tuesday you do a second time, you continue doing on soy. So you reintroduce soy, and then you'd be like, okay, well, let's see if the second hit creates any symptoms. If it's still nothing on Wednesday, then you're most likely good to go. And then you can reintroduce the next food. So let's just say the next food is corn. You can take whether it's corn on a cob, it can be a corn tortilla, right? And so you don't want to have a little bit, like you want to be in a larger amount, and see how to like really hit your body with that food item and see how you respond to it. Okay. My recommendation is to keep eggs, dairy, and gluten for the last, because it is they tend to be most problematic for most people. I hope your eggs are not your problem, because a lot of people this is their big breakfast food, right? And I totally get that. But the truth is, let me give you like a super quick story. When I was in private practice, I worked with a woman who was like one of the top executives in one of the major tech companies in California. And she was married for 6 months, and she was her husband gave her and told her that if something doesn't change, he's going to divorce her. Imagine, after 6 months of being married. And then her review of her team gave her such terrible reviews that she, based on her behavior, unpredictable, extremely moody, mean to people, right? That basically there were like, her position was a question. So imagine, like, she basically, in short, her husband almost divorced her and she almost lost her job. And the challenge with her was too, is that she was a very strict religious vegan, so that wasn't helpful to do the elimination diet. But she was depending on a lot of gluten, and she was eating dairy. So I don't think she was vegan. She was probably vegetarian. She was eating dairy. So and then she started, because she was feeling so weak. But by the time I met her, she was also doing eggs. And so when we remove these foods, we really have to navigate how to structure. But anyway, the point of the matter was that things got better. And then when she reintroduced the eggs, she had this major episode of just being completely losing her marbles. And that's when there was the realization that it was the eggs that were causing the issue for her. So as you can see, like, this is a superfood, and then is for one person. So as nutrition, we say, one person's food is another person's poison. So be respectful of that, right? And anyway, so that's you go by the symptoms is the biggest thing. There's two other ways you can determine whether that food is a problem or not. Scale. So get a scale, and one of the things that you can do is basically, so remember how on Monday you introduce gluten, right? And so take your weight before you do that. So let's just say you're 140 pounds. On a Monday morning, you do gluten, right? I don't need to tell you, you can have your bagel and whatever. And then on Tuesday, you go back and weigh yourself and see the difference in the weight. If you have fairly constant weight and you suddenly put on anything more than 2 pounds, and this is, you want to compare it apple to apple, right? So let's say you either before pooping or after pooping, before drinking water, before breakfast, whatever is your parameters, just do the same thing on the following day. And you will notice that anything more than 2 pounds is the inflammatory response of the body when it's holding on to water, is retaining water, right? And that's going to be a water weight, and that's not good. That's a sign of inflammation. Another way you can do this is to do, and by the way, all of this is in my books, Overcoming Estrogen Dominance and Cooking for Hormone Balance, both of them available on Amazon, where you can also do what we call the heart pulse test. And the way the heart pulse test works is actually pretty immediate. What you do is measure your pulse. And so, you can just do it here by measuring your pulse here, or you can do it on the side here, right? And measure it before you introduce the food. So let's just say my resting heart rate is 54, right? I'm an athlete, so it's 54. Yours might be a little bit higher if you're not athletic, but it's like 60 is pretty normal standard for women. So let's just say it's 60, right? And you introduce the food, and then half an hour later, you want to measure your pulse again. And it's really fascinating to see, provided that you have not drank coffee. So please don't drink coffee or anything caffeinated, because that's going to jack up your pulse immediately. Don't drink any tea, so nothing caffeinated, just that food alone. And then see how much more has the pulse gone up for you. If it has gone anything more than 10 beats, so if it's gone, for example, from 60, it's gone up now to 70, half an hour later, that could be an indicator that that food might be your problem. And the interesting thing with that method is that it's almost like an allergy test, right? Even though it's not, because your symptoms might show up, like I said, a day or 2 days later, and not necessarily like right away. But the pulse will tell you. And so it's so fascinating, right? Like how the body can just respond to that. So if I know dairy is a problem, would I bring it back anyway at the end of the elimination diet? Nikki's asking, good question. I would suggest, yes, do so, just to know what your symptoms are. For example, my issue and how much you can tolerate. That's another thing. My issue, for example, with dairy is that makes me constipated. Very common if you're dealing with constipation, you've done a lot of different things. One thing to add on to the list of things to try is reducing or taking out dairy and see whether that gives you constipation. What about wheat? Oh yeah, I mean, wheat is all gluten, you guys. So gluten is found in you need to get educated on it, because if you're do it properly and be educated, so you know exactly, you don't screw it up, so you know exactly what foods are in which group. So gluten is found in wheat, is found in kamut, is found in wheat berries, right? Of course. So all the flours, like the regular flours, right, etc., are that's all gluten. So I want to talk a little bit about buckwheat. Buckwheat is not, actually buckwheat does not, that's why we have a lot of buckwheat recipes, and buckwheat does not have gluten. It's a confusing name. So I want to talk about how do you, also Nikki, on that point about the dairy, I think it's an really interesting point about finding out to the elimination diet, also like what kind of dairy is your problem. So actually, let me pull it out from, I think I have it in one of the books about how to, it's in this one here. So in the book here, I talk about how do you separate dairy. No, it's not this one here. I try not to repeat content in both the books, and sometimes I forget what is where. Oh, there we go. So I'm reading this from Overcoming Estrogen Dominance. There is a section here on how to separate dairy into different categories. So you might, for example, try first cow's milk and cheese, which is mostly problematic. And then you might want to do cow's yogurt, kefir, or cottage cheese. Why? Because they're fermented. And through the fermentation process, the lactose, which is the sugar found in dairy, gets eaten up by the lactic bacteria. However, this is not a foolproof method, because what happens is there's two things that typically we have a problem with in dairy. One is lactose, which is the sugar, and the second one is the protein called casein. And so if you are having a problem with casein, the lack of lactose ain't gonna save you, meaning that a yogurt can still be a problem, and definitely is for me. And then third category is goat and sheep cheese, especially those aged ones. They will have no lactose, but they will have casein in them. And then you can also try goat and sheep yogurt and soft cheeses and see whether you can tolerate them better. A lot of people feel like goat and sheep, they can tolerate better. Generally, cow is not very well tolerated, even in people who are eating hard cheeses. So Sherry's asking, what about thyroid problems? I have 0.1 on my labs. So when you say 0.1, is it your TSH? Definitely. So especially with if you're having Hashimoto's disease, and we talked about lab testing for thyroid just last week. So the short answer is yes, absolutely yes, a resounding yes. And the reason is, if you're having Hashimoto's, it's an autoimmune disease. It needs to be addressed through diet, period. Number two is that when you do the elimination diet, that's a very low 0.1. So, your TSH should be between 1 and 2. So you're kind of like hyperthyroid, not hypo. So you're overactive thyroid. Anyway, and then when you do the elimination diet, your digestive health and your liver gets restored. And that's going to be essential for your thyroid health as well, because your thyroid gets converted from T4 to T3 hormone in the gut and the liver. So every reason to do that. You guys, let me just say this. The elimination diet ain't going to hurt you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not some experimental diet that I'm recommending for you that you might, I don't know, have like severe reaction to. It's got some crazy stuff in there. It really is not going to hurt you. The worst thing that can happen is that nothing happens, and your symptoms are still there, and you're still achy, and you can't sleep, and you've got, hormonal problems and all that. One other thing I forgot to mention is that by doing the elimination diet, a lot of women have also reported less hot flashes. One of the things that you can do before you start the elimination diet is to write down all your symptoms and do like a scale from 0 to 10, and then see whether, because we forget how sick we felt. And I did this all the time when I was in private practice. We would write down, the symptoms before we started, right? And give them a grade from 0 to 10, 10 being the worst, 0 being no problem. And then the person will do the elimination diet. We meet, 2-3 months later. And I'm going down the symptoms, and she's like, oh yeah, I forgot about those night sweats that I used to having to change my bed sheets. Oh, I forgot about the brain fog, that I could never focus on reading the newspaper, and or not absorbing anything in my brain, right? And so on and so forth. So, because the change is gradual. It's like the same thing, like you don't see your child grow up, right? Unless you see those markers on the wall and you're like, whoa. So it's the same thing with the elimination diet. I highly recommend that. Let's see, have I not answered anything here? So we talked about what are the benefits, what foods, how long for. So 4 weeks, you can go on for 8 weeks. We talked about how to reintroduce foods and what to look for. And then we talked about recipes you can use. So both my books have that. If you want to go deeper into like paleo for autoimmunity, Dr. Terry Walls is amazing. She is an MD who had MS, and then she's in a total she's walking and functioning. She's a trooper. And so there's a lot of different options depending on how deep you want to go. My recommendation is, if you've never done this before, is to do the elimination diet first, like the gentle form that I'm advocating. And if you're still you're highly symptomatic, then you can go deeper and then maybe work with a practitioner who understands food sensitivity. So for example, let me give you an example here. Because is the elimination diet a holy grail to all your health issues? Possibly yes, but possibly no. And so, it could be that, for instance, you are doing the elimination diet, but then, every time, one thing I forgot to mention is also you're going to be keeping a journal. So if it's in the books, it's in, there is a URL that to download your food journal, your food, mood, and poop journal, because your poop actually tells you a bunch of things. And when you start logging things, then you start realizing you just become so much more in tune with your body. And you might realize, like, hold on a second, like I'm doing the elimination diet, but then when I'm having a glass of wine, I'm like really stuffy and I get like itchy, and my whole front chest gets like red and rashy, like what's going on, right? And so then, then if you contact us, or if you're working with a practitioner, then you realize like, oh, maybe it's a histamine issue, and then you can go deeper into studying histamine and what you need to do in order to improve your body, or just like really calm your body down so it doesn't have the kind of histamine reaction to it. So just one example. Okay, Jen, why don't we do a couple of questions from Facebook and YouTube, and then Summer is asking, can you show one of your books? Yeah, so Overcoming Estrogen Dominance and then Cooking for Hormone Balance. Both of them are available on Amazon. If you just enter my name, I think Magdalena and Hormones on Amazon is gonna come out. Okay, sorry, Jen. Let's take a look what we have there. Shelly is saying, are there any tests that you recommend that can be taken to determine what foods you eat can cause inflammation in your body? So I think, Shelly, you might have missed the initial part of my presentation. The answer is they are, but they are not reliable. And so they show a lot of false negatives, meaning that they show you that you don't have a problem with certain foods, but that's actually not true. So I don't find them reliable at all. The golden standard amongst functional nutritionists is to do the elimination diet. Anne is saying dairy causes me bloating. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Can I just share with you, before I take more questions, let me share my experience with my food sensitivities is that food intolerance specifically is that I can have gluten once in a while, but if I eat it daily, I'm going to get sick. Like literally my body just shuts down and I get like a cold or a flu. And that just shows you how food sensitivities can also reduce your immune system and your response of the immune system to factors, right? To pathogens. I never get sick, and I have not been sick. I still have not had COVID even, it amazes me. I stopped wearing a mask. I've been going and hanging out with people. I'm sure been exposed many times, and I still have not gotten it. So my immune system is in a good place. So that's what dairy is gonna give me an IBS if I eat it on a regular basis. So I can have it maybe once a week, twice a week. So I have high quality dairy, even the hard cheeses like Parmigiano Reggiano, or whether it's sheep kefir, you think like, oh, sheep milk might be better, just doesn't work for me. And I can have it occasionally if I go out and it's like a really nice, dinner and there's some dairy in it, I can have that, no problem. If I eat this every day, after 10 days of doing that or so, I get like a total IBS with massive diarrhea. Otherwise, I get constipated from dairy. That's my regular thing. So that's how I learned my body, right? And so it's not a hard stop and saying like, no, never, this is going to get me severely sick. But it's like, okay, if I have it, I'm going to pay the price a little bit and I just can't overdo it. With eggs, I get zits. And so but I can have them like up to between 2 and 4 every week, and not more than that, right? So, I really hope that you can, through the elimination diet, you can learn to read your own body. And by the way, also, before I forget, food sensitivities change, and you can support your body, excuse me, with things like digestive enzymes, with things like digestive bitters that we have in our store as well. When you're, where your body is better equipped in breaking down those proteins, because there's those proteins in the foods that are causing the problem. And when you're breaking down those chains, that the body is, a lot of times when we are not digesting the food properly, that's what causes these inflammatory responses. So one way to mitigate, if you discover, for example, dairy is your problem, having some digestive enzymes with it, digestive bitters before that, could potentially help. Okay, so let's have some other questions. What if your symptoms are off and on to begin with, as in brain fog and constipation? So several good days, then days at a time that aren't. How are you to know when we're introducing foods? So Susan, it could be also that there is other food sensitivities that are playing a role. I'll give you an example. Like, I had a client who was doing the elimination diet with me, and she kind of have this on and off thing going on. And we finally figured out it was bananas that were her problem. So there could be another food. The other thing is, if you're having a sort of like very erratic responses to food, one of the things to look into is parasites. Parasites, which by the way, 70% of people have it at one point in their life. So don't think that, oh, somebody else would have parasites, but not me. I've had them many times. I'm sure many of you here have them. You don't even realize that. And so parasites is what causes a lot of these sort of very erratic responses to food. Is very hard to nail. Okay, what else do we have? With dairy, can certain dairy products be more easily tolerable? Yeah, like I think I've just explained that, right? With sheep, and sheep being more digestible compared to cow. Okay, what else? I just recently realized there is a correlation between bananas and latex allergies. Okay, cool. Diana is saying here, I'm type 2 diabetic. I have lupus, and I'm 5'10", probably 20 pounds overweight on my belly. I'm pretty much keto. Do you think artificial sweeteners are okay? Yeah, absolutely not. You should not be doing them. And that's what potentially could be causing a problem. What I drink is lactose-free dairy. Would that be masking symptoms? Yes, it could be. So like I explained that you could, because remember, lactose-free dairy still contains casein, the protein, right? So if you're having an intolerance towards casein, then lactose-free dairy products are not going to help. It's a good question. Yeah, let's see. Do we have any other good questions there? Do you recommend a good, true liver cleanse? Well, I'm kind of biased, but our thyroid detox is right now, it's on promotion, and it's a self-guided program that I created after being in Thailand for 12 days. And I thought not everybody wants to go to Thailand or has the resources to go to Thailand for 12 days to do a detox. So it's a 12-day detox that we created with the manager of the retreat, actually. And so if you look at our website, welena.com, actually, if you're on Instagram, you can just go to our bio link, and the thyroid detox program is there. And it's a really silly name because it just means that I created originally for people with thyroid and Hashimoto's disease, but the truth of the matter is that it is really beneficial for anybody with hormonal problems. And so we work a lot there on the liver. There's also a liver flush, and explaining how to do liver flush. You have got to be careful with the liver flush. A lot of people do it very liberally and do it incorrectly, and then they get very sick. And so we explain there in the handouts on how to do it correctly. Do you recommend a low FODMAP diet? So possibly, if that's your challenge. So one of the benefits of keeping a journal, right, is that when you are doing the elimination diet, and for example, let's just say you had an onion soup, and you write down there, had onion soup, and then 2 hours later, oops, I'm farting like there's no tomorrow, right? Then what's going on? And the answer is that you're like, oh wait, onions. And that's one of the things I do talk about in Cooking for Hormone Balance. I go much deeper into how to go deeper after the elimination diet, right? And so the answer could be that, that low FODMAP diet is something that a person requires. My challenge with low FODMAP diet is that it still promotes certain things like dairy and gluten because it's technically a low FODMAP. So, you really need to navigate that. When I had a lot of digestive issues, I certainly could not do certain FODMAP foods like onions, for example, garlic were really setting me off. Shiitake mushrooms, which I love. But then once I repaired my gut, I could do it again. So I think it's not a diet on its own. It needs to be combined with other things as well. Okay, what about a change to oat milk? Yes, you can definitely do that to replace milk. Definitely, yes. And then we have a question about plant-based. What about plant-based meat product? Absolutely not. If you look at, I have a couple of colleagues who kind of broke down of what's inside those products. It's just a real chemistry lab that you're eating, a lot of very synthetic things. So the short answer is no. And you can go to YouTube and just look for, Beyond Meat and all these kind of products, and like an ingredient breakdown by people who really know what they're talking about. And it's highly unhealthy. If you're planning to have a burger, just have a real burger. Really simple as that. That's my problem with a lot of low oxalate diets. I've been finding they promote some really unhealthy options. That's true. So you have to use your own judgment on these sort of things. Mick K is asking, can you have any sweeteners on the elimination diet like raw honey and monk fruit? Yes, you can. And be careful with monk fruit, because there's even a whole table of what are the healthiest sweeteners and which ones are not so healthy. So agave is a good example, which is a total BS, a sweetener that's full of fructose, which has to be metabolized by your liver, and that's not good. Monk fruit, just to be careful with that, because monk fruit, a lot of times, like Lancanto, the company, advertises that as monk fruit, but actually the first one is not monk fruit, but is erythritol. So, which is basically your sugar alcohol, as a lot of people have a problem with. Let me just dive over to Instagram for a second. Do you have any, Diane asking about hair breakage, look into your thyroid. Do you think, Nikki's asking, do you think it will be helpful for a preteen who's starting hormones changes and starting pimples? Absolutely, yes. I remember one of the articles that really got me thinking about my own zits when I was in my 20s was the article that I found, because that's what pointed me to in the whole journey. It said, why is it that teenagers in Papua New Guinea, right, which is like a super remote country, between Southeast Asia and Australia, do not have pimples? And I thought, that's so interesting. It's true, they don't have pimples. In fact, I grew up in a country called Malaysia. And when you go into out of cities and you go into villages, right, kids don't have pimples. And I thought, wait a second, that's so true. And so, is the processed foods, is the amount of dairy, is the gluten, etc., that can be a hugely contributing factor here. So definitely recommend that. Do you have any recommendations to flush possibly of a parasite of sort? Yeah, so that's part of thyroid detox. Actually, we recommend to do a parasite cleanse together with the detox, and there are some recommendations on how to do that. I have kidney and gallbladder stones. Yeah, again, thyroid detox is a really great program for that. That's what we created it for. They always tell me my thyroid is fine, my liver, and I have fatty liver. Yeah, fatty liver typically comes from processed foods, too much sugar. So that's something to consider really, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record, but the thyroid detox program might really be a good idea for you, because that's what fatty liver, if it's a non-alcoholic fatty liver, then you're talking about reducing a lot of the inflammatory foods that's causing the inflammation in the liver in the first place. All right, Jen, let's do one more question and then wrap up. How do I get, this is a great question, which is like my mother used to fight with me over this. How do I get a proper amount of calcium if you can't eat dairy, especially if you don't have estrogen anymore and can't take replacement? Okay, great question. I had this argument with my mother for years, and she was plagued by a lot of different symptoms, and she would not want to give up dairy for the very same reason. So first thing you need to know is that the dairy industry has done a fantastic job at marketing as the dairy being the only way of getting calcium into your diet, okay? And they've bought doctors, and it's just the same thing has been said over and over again. So let me ask you a question, Susan. And it's not to, just really, like, it's just a simple observational question, right? When you look at the cows out in the fields, what do cows eat? Grass, right? Hay, right? Do they have problems with their bones and calcium? Do they drink milk and eat dairy? No. And their bones are stronger than ours. So the answer is you can actually get a lot of calcium from dark green leafy vegetables. You can get calcium, for example, if you are eating sardines, by the way, guys, mashing sardines with some avocado, putting on a toast, fantastic quick lunch. And and making sure that those sardines contain the bones. If you want to strengthen the part of the body on your body, eat that part of the animal, right? So eat a bone to get the bones. And so bone broth, however, does not have calcium. So just like a little thing here. So sardines are fantastic for that. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then, there's always supplementation, and making sure that you don't just take calcium, but you also combine it with magnesium. The supplement contains magnesium in it, D3, boron, manganese. Lastly, if you're worried about bones and osteoporosis, I'm completely off topic here, making sure you have sufficient estrogen and progesterone, because these two hormones are what creates the scaffolding in your bones for those minerals to get deposited. Okay. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful for you guys to really understand how the elimination diet works. And I hope I convinced at least some of you to give it a shot. We are after the holidays. It's going to be a lot more, hopefully, your time that you can actually spend on doing this. And, and really hope this is going to help you. And this is, this is the reason why my books are not just about like a whole bunch of herbs and supplements only, but it's about food, because food is so foundational that, like I said, no amount of supplements are going to fix your hormones if you're highly inflamed from your diet. So starting off with the elimination diet, I have found that to be so foundational. It's a non-negotiable. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. Don't be afraid of doing this. Approach it from a place of curiosity, excitement. Think about the reduction of symptoms that can create for you. And I can promise you that once you have a plan, and you surround yourself with all the different foods that you can be having, you go like, oh my God, I'm actually walking into a health food store and I can like all these vegetables I can actually have, and all these meats I can have, and all that fish I can have, and there's all these gluten-free pastas now available and all that, right? Is actually not as difficult as it once was, 10 years ago when there was no resources. So anyway, have a wonderful start of the weekend. I'm already like in a weekend mode, and we'll see you sometime soon. Bye for now.